On May 5, 1999, 34-year-old Debbie Elizabeth Cameron disappeared from her own home in Deal, UK under strange circumstances. For more than 20 years, officers had only one suspect and no clues. However, in 2019, everything changed. Debbie Elizabeth Cameron was born on December 10, 1964 in the town of Deal, County Kent, United Kingdom. She was the eldest daughter of Brian and Patricia Cameron, who also had another daughter named Wendy. Brian and Patricia came from large families with deep roots in the seaside town of Deal. Because of these connections, their two daughters grew up surrounded by the love of relatives. Debbie was trained as a nurse. In 1990, she married Andrew Griggs and has since gone by the name Debbie Griggs. Andrew followed in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, choosing to become a fisherman and staying true to the family tradition. To do so, he opened a fish shop in the area, a fairly common business with a lot of competition. For her part, Debbie worked at the town hospital and also spent some time caring for people in nursing homes and looking after disabled children. However, everything changed in 1992 with the birth of their first son, Jeremy. Over the next 5 years, the couple had two more children, Jack and Luke. Debbie was a wonderful mother, she loved her children and was very patient. But the family continued to grow, and in May 1999, the woman learned that she was 4 months pregnant. Any outsider looking into the Griggs' home would have thought that everything was working out just fine. The arrival of the baby seemed to be an indicator of a wonderful family life, the joy of which was shared by everyone, especially the children, who would have another little brother and playmate. The reality, however, was quite different. All this was happening behind closed doors, and Debbie silently endured her torment. The problems in their married life were becoming unbearable and seemed to grow daily. Andrew's abuse was compounded by his cheating. A man was in a relationship with a girl who was only 15. It was serious from every angle, not only because of the affair itself, but because a grown man was dating a minor. Thinking of the consequences of all this, Debbie gave him a scandal, but he denied everything. In the presence of her children, the woman smiled, reflecting her affection for them. But as she closed her bedroom door, tears rolled down her eyes. She felt violated by the man who had once said he loved her. Debbie's only outlet was to recount her suffering in her diary, where she wrote down the worst experiences of her relationship, not even realizing that in the future those same pages would speak for her in her journal. She detailed all the abuse and mistreatment from her husband, who wouldn't let her go out alone, called her crazy, and constantly told her that everything she had belonged to him and that she had no right to their shared property. Although the Griggs' marriage wasn't perfect, neighbors saw them as a normal family with young children who had good days and bad days. But on May 5, 1999, everything changed when Debbie mysteriously disappeared from her own home. As hard as it was to be without his wife and dealing with 3 kids who needed a mom, Andrew waited 24 hours before calling the authorities to report her missing in a calm voice. He told the operator that his wife had left the house upset and that she had taken a few pounds. Also, according to him, Debbie had taken a white car, the registration number of which he could not remember. Andrew told the operator that his wife was suffering from postnatal depression as they had 3 children and she was pregnant with their 4th. On the evening of the same day, Kent police arrived at the Griggs' home to take a statement. Upon Andrew's arrival, they noticed the strange calmness with which the man spoke about not knowing anything about his wife. The agents asked him for his car papers to begin the search and to pass on all information to the officers so they could pull him over if they saw him. They also asked him for a recent photo of his spouse, but he said he didn't have one. This made investigators suspicious that something was really wrong here, as it was very strange that the man did not have a picture of the woman he had been married to for 10 years. For a long time, officers were under the impression that from the little information Andrew provided, and because of the way he did it, it gave the impression that he didn't want the woman to be found. The man told police that on the night of Debbie's disappearance, he came home around 7 p.m. and fell asleep in the living room while she was in the kitchen. The woman then woke him up with a very angry scream. A few minutes later, she came out the back door, very angry, and left. According to him, Debbie put on a coat and took her purse before she left. Andrew said that the next morning he continued his normal routine, stopping by his family's fish store to turn off his computer, and then visiting the yacht club to check the fuel in the lifeboats he was responsible for maintaining. When asked by the police why he had gone out on business before reporting his wife missing, the man replied that he wasn't too worried as she had gone out before but always returned the next day. The man seemed to have an answer for everything and tried to portray his wife as a fiery woman who makes a decision without much thought. This was to deflect suspicion and give the impression that Debbie had simply gone somewhere and would be back soon. Despite Andrew's words, the detectives found it strange that the woman decided to leave and abandon her 3 young children. A few days later, on May 12th, officers were able to locate Debbie's car abandoned about a kilometer from her home. Traces of the woman's blood were found in the trunk of the car. This was a bad omen for the police. Another bad omen was that Debbie's bank accounts remained dormant, with no contact with health or social services. Given these signs, hope that the woman would be found alive was slowly fading. And while investigators thought the outcome of the case would not be good, at the Griggs home, Debbie's young children were asking where their mother was. They needed her love and care and did not understand the reasons for her disappearance. It didn't take long for the police to make Andrew the prime suspect, and the case soon went from a missing person investigation to a murder investigation. Because of this, Andrew was first arrested 20 days after his wife's disappearance, on suspicion of murder. Despite the lack of evidence to remove all possible doubt and convict him, it became clear that he had a motive for wanting to cut Debbie out of his life. Investigators discovered that the woman had learned of her husband's affair with an underage girl and apparently had no intention of hiding it. However, Andrew denied that he had a relationship with the girl, claiming that she was just a friend. The girl was then called to testify and denied having a romantic relationship with Andrew. Another important point discovered during the investigation was that a few weeks before his wife's alleged disappearance, the man, in a fit of anger, sought the advice of a lawyer who informed him that Debbie was entitled to half of his business in the event of a divorce. To further fuel suspicion, 3 days before the woman disappeared, Andrew opened a new bank account for the business in his name only. As an excuse, he claimed he did this because she had taken the company's check stubs. The investigators on the case, and all those who wanted to find out what had happened to Debbie, suffered a serious setback when the prosecutor's office ruled that there was insufficient evidence to try Andrew and he was released. The case remained open, evidence was regularly reviewed, further investigations were carried out, but they all led to dead ends. The police investigation could only point to the woman's abandoned car as evidence, but unfortunately this provided no further information. Andrew remained the prime suspect, but it didn't appear that he was overly concerned. What's more, 2 years later, the man began having an affair with a woman who, curiously enough, was also named Debbie. The frustration of the investigators was obvious, but since there was no body or definite proof of his guilt, nothing could be done. The evidence pointing to what had happened to Debbie was limited, so the case was virtually never investigated and was soon forgotten. In July 2001, Andrew and his new partner moved to a new town where they and their 3 children created a family for the children. Their father was the only thing they had left, so the arrival of a new woman in the house may have been a healing of the wound left by their mother's absence. Together they tried to put the painful past behind them, keeping alive in their hearts the memory of a woman who disappeared in an instant. Despite the lack of answers and, more importantly, the lack of understanding of the situation, the children adapted very well to their new life. Andrew, for his part, took up a new business, making ship models, as he was an experienced sailor and was well versed in the subject. Despite the fact that the man was still accused of the crime against his first wife, for the next 20 years he remained completely unpunished. It was obvious that Debbie was dead, as no trace of her had been found in any government system during that time. Since the man was trying to make her look mentally unstable, the thought arose that he might have made an attempt on her life. Although this theory seemed completely unfounded, authorities investigated but found nothing. Despite extensive international searches and DNA analysis of unidentified female bodies on social media, Andrew and his new wife posted pictures of themselves looking happy and very much in love. They even made renovations to the house, setting up a cozy and pleasant room to relax in. However, the tranquility they enjoyed all these years was interrupted by events of the past that knocked on the family's door with the word justice. The ghost of a missing woman has only now returned to 57-year-old Andrew. Bad luck for the man, since many years ago. Nearly 2 decades later, unsolved case detectives from Kent's Major Crimes Unit re-examined all the evidence against Andrew. Prosecutors said that while there was no new evidence, the passage of time helped disprove the theory that Debbie was alive or that she died of her own actions. Andrew's name once again caught the attention of the authorities, who were willing to do anything to bring justice to the allegedly missing woman and her children, deprived of a mother's love at such a young age. It was implausible to the new investigators that a mother had abandoned her young children without explanation. In addition to the evidence they already had, this time information that had been hidden for years was uncovered, and when the puzzle was put together, it became easier to understand why these events occurred. Detectives found a diary written by Debbie, which revealed the constant abuse the woman had been subjected to over the years. Determined to dig into the past for clues, they again interviewed the suspect's friends. They reported that shortly before Debbie's disappearance, Andrew had said that he wished his wife was dead because not only was it interfering with his relationship with the teenager, but if he divorced her, he would have to share half of the family business. This was also the time of a dramatic change in the statement of one of the key witnesses, a teenage girl with whom Andrew had a relationship and who had testified in his favor during the events. By this time, she was ready to tell the truth and claimed that as a teenager, she had been manipulated by a man into lying to authorities. She later corroborated this statement in court. The prosecution's case was that Andrew, being an experienced sailor, could have dumped his first wife's body at sea, from where it would have been difficult to retrieve. Senior Crown Prosecutor Nigel Pilkington deemed him the person who had the most reason to end Debbie's life, and so the man went on trial. During the hearing, Prosecutor Duncan Atkinson told the court that the defendant killed his wife at his home and then disposed of the body by burying it or throwing it into the sea. He argued that concealing the whereabouts of the body was the most aggravating factor in the case. According to the indictment, in March 1999, in the midst of marital difficulties, the defendant opened a new bank account for his store in his name only. And then on May 6th, after his then-wife disappeared, he closed their joint account. The prosecution also read to the court excerpts from Debbie's diary, in which she complained that her husband accused her of being sick and crazy and that he spent almost all nights out of the house. In addition, there were entries in which she noted all the times he had told her that she was not entitled to any of their shared property. The prosecutor said that in March 1999, the man began the process of filing for divorce but stopped it, allegedly because they reconciled that month. However, Andrew only changed his mind after learning that his wife was entitled to half of the family business, which she co-owned. So he had to figure out how to cut her out of his life without giving her anything. The indictment says that a few days after Debbie disappeared, the manager of the dental office called Andrew and asked for the woman's date of birth and other information, and all of the man's answers were in the past tense. According to prosecutors, he did so because he already knew she was dead. The prosecutor said that long before Debbie's disappearance, Andrew had begun preparing for the crime by informing everyone close to him that his wife was losing consciousness due to severe postpartum depression. To refute these words of the suspect, Debbie's attending physician, Peter Schote, appeared as a prosecution witness and stated that his patient had no signs and symptoms of depression in the weeks before her disappearance. He specified that she had experienced postpartum depression after the birth of her first two children, but this was not the case with her third child. Two of the couple's neighbors testified in court that they saw Debbie's car pull away from the house on May 6th at about 2 p.m., and again the same day at 4 p.m., but it was not her driving. The defendant pleaded not guilty and reiterated his initial testimony that his ex-wife suffered from depression and had abandoned him and their children. In closing argument, the prosecutor stated that Debbie's murder was committed first to avoid the financial consequences of the divorce and second to avoid the legal consequences of the defendant's unlawful association with a minor. The prosecutor told the jury that the man attacked his wife in their home when the 3 children were asleep and the 4th child was in her womb, but that didn't stop him either. Given all of this evidence, despite the absence of a body, in October 2019, a jury found Andrew guilty of murdering his wife Debbie, as well as hiding the body. A sentencing hearing was scheduled for some time later. Debbie's father issued a victim impact statement. He first noted that Patricia, his wife, passed away in early 2019 with a broken heart, not knowing where Debbie was. According to him, they never understood how their daughter could disappear overnight, and not a day went by that they didn't wonder what happened to her and where her body was. After hearing witness testimony, Judge Robin Spencer sentenced Andrew Griggs to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years in prison. On October 5, 2022, police received an anonymous call from a man who reported that Debbie's remains were in the garden of Andrew's home, where he had moved in 2001 with his new wife and 3 children. Authorities went to the site and excavated and found human remains, including tooth fragments. Subsequently, thanks to analysis by several dental specialists, it was confirmed that the remains were Debbie's. At the press conference, they announced that more tests would be done to determine the cause of death and how the remains ended up at the plot. While this news stirred up all the memories and caused sadness and pain for the family, they finally have a body to say goodbye to. Despite this, investigators have many mysteries to solve, including how the crime occurred and how Debbie's body was delivered to Andrew's new home, where his children ran around in the grass as youngsters and as adults threw dozens of parties, unaware that their mother's body lay in the ground beneath their feet. Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments, as well as watch other videos on my channel.